Art mirrors the human condition.
We uncover its hidden patterns,
Experience human creativity.
elevated by digital analysis.
Welcome to the Academy.
Join the journey.
Let's dive right into this explainer. You know, when you hear the word Troy, I bet your mind jumps straight to a giant wooden horse, sneaky soldiers in the dead of night, and a massive sprawling 10-year siege. But what if I told you the foundational text of this entire mythological war doesn't actually feature that horse at all?
Seriously, forget the 10-year siege and the Trojan horse for a minute, because to truly understand this absolute masterpiece, we're going to do exactly what Homer did. We're dropping you right into the blood-soaked, highly emotional core of the story. Set right at the tail end in the 10th year of the war, the Iliad doesn't bother recounting the whole conflict. There's no big sacking of the city here. Instead, it zeroes in on just a few weeks and one single catastrophic emotion, the world-shattering rage or menace of the Greek hero Achilles.
So, here is how we'll unpack the Iliad from the inside out. First, the rage of Achilles. Second, how the epic was built. Third, the real ruins of Troy. And finally, glory, war, and fate.
Starting right off with Section 1, The Rage of Achilles, a story of grief, not just a war.
Here's the setup. The Greek commander Agamemnon severely dishonors Achilles, and the fallout from this is just absolutely devastating. Feeling incredibly slighted, Achilles stubbornly pulls himself and his elite troops completely out of the fight. And without him, well, the Greeks suffer these brutal, heavy losses to the Trojans. But the real breaking point hits when Achilles' closest companion, Patroclus, gets killed by the Trojan prince Hector. This flips a switch. It triggers an unstoppable frenzy of grief-stricken revenge, which ultimately ends with Achilles slaughtering Hector.
But the biggest takeaway here is how this whole thing resolves. This rage doesn't culminate in some triumphant, heroic battle or a flashy victory parade. It goes to a much darker place. Achilles literally desecrates Hector's body, dragging it through the dirt behind his chariot. But then, eventually, he breaks down and yields the corpse to the mourning Trojan king, Priam. It brings the epic to this incredibly somber and profoundly human close, forcing us to really sit with the agonizing human cost of all this conflict.
All right, moving into Section 2. How the epic was built, the mechanics of a masterpiece.
Homer uses a genuinely brilliant literary technique here called in medias res. It literally translates to starting a story in the middle of things. And the Iliad is basically the poster child for this. The poet completely skips the whole Golden Apple backstory and Helen getting abducted. He assumes the ancient audience already knows all that history. So he plunges us straight into the messy camp politics and Achilles' psychological breaking point. It's a wildly effective way to hook your audience from minute one.
And to make an audience wrap their heads around the unimaginable, chaotic scale of these mythic clashes of bronze, the poet relied heavily on epic similes. Homer constantly compares the sheer violence of the battlefield to terrifying, totally relatable natural disasters. Think of a river violently bursting its banks, wolves tearing into a flock of helpless sheep, or a massive forest fire just raging across a mountain. It perfectly bridges the gap between the mythic realm and the real world, grounding the whole story.
But hey, we have to keep in mind the actual medium here. This wasn't written down originally. It was sung by traveling bards in a vibrant 8th century BCE oral tradition. They had to memorize and perform this live. It was composed in a very strict rhythmic meter, called dactylic hexameter. And to pull this off, they used these recurring stock epithets, phrases you hear over and over, like swift-footed Achilles or Hector, tamer of horses. These built-in phrases allowed the performers to keep the musical beat going and essentially improvise the narrative over generations before it ever got locked into a fixed text. In fact, because of this incredible collaborative process, whether a single guy named Homer even existed is still heavily debated by scholars today.
Let's jump to Section 3, The Real Ruins of Troy, Unearthing the Myth. To ancient Iron Age Greeks living around the 8th century BCE, the late Mycenaean Bronze Age of 1200 BCE felt like this distant, golden epoch filled with physically superior demigods. And you know, for centuries, modern folks thought Troy was purely mythological, just a really good story. That is, until the timeline completely flipped on its head in the late 19th century.
Get this, archaeological excavations at a site called Hisarlik in modern-day Turkey uncovered the actual, literal, burnt ruins of a fortified Bronze Age city. Even crazier, the ruins clearly showed the city had been repeatedly destroyed by fire and intense conflict. This physical evidence proved that a real, historical siege most likely sparked centuries of this magnificent myth-making. the legend actually had a true foundation in reality.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, Glory, War, and Fate, the timeless philosophy.
The Iliad endures because it presents this really profound paradox, the dual nature of war. On one hand, yeah, it totally glorifies breathtaking martial combat, highlighting physical beauty, pure courage, and gleaming armor. But at the exact same time, it functions as a devastating anti-war manifesto. It never ever shies away from gruesome anatomical death and the agonizing grief of the widows and parents left behind. It doesn't spoon-feed you how to feel, it just lays out the terrifying totality of war.
And layered right on top of all that human suffering is the cosmic order of fate, or Moira. We're talking about an overarching, completely inescapable destiny that binds absolutely everyone, even the Olympian gods. Sure, the gods constantly bicker, they take sides, and they play favorites in the human slaughter, but they cannot rewrite the final destiny of mortals. We see this vividly when Zeus himself is forced to weigh the unchangeable fates of Hector and Achilles on his golden scales. Even the king of the gods cannot alter what's meant to be.
So, you might be wondering, if your fate is already sealed by Moira, why bother fighting at all? Well, the answer is Kleos. See, the ancient Greek underworld Hades was viewed as an incredibly bleak, shadowy existence for pretty much everyone. So the absolute driving force for these heroes was Kleos, earning true immortality on the battlefield. It was seen as literally the only way to escape that shadowy void, by ensuring their names would be sung in poetry forever. Knowing all of this, Achilles made a conscious choice. He chose a short, intensely violent life that would result in eternal fame over a long, peaceful life completely lost to obscurity. He chose to be remembered, knowing exactly what it would cost him and everyone he loved. Which leaves us with one final, deeply personal question for you to ponder today. Considering the steep price of glory and the absolute guarantee of fate, which path would you choose?
Love the masterpiece? Subscribe for more.